Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me great pleasure today to be speaking with Dr. Ananya Vajpeyi on her new book, Place, Intimate Encounters with Cities. Ananya is professor at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, New Delhi, or as we know it better, CSDS. She's an intellectual historian, political theorist, and a thinker. And given the work that she does, she has several scholarly works to her name. But this, she says, is the first time that she's written something like this, which is part memoir, part intellectual history, and part travel writing. This book is a collection of essays that has been written over 25 years. And in the book, she writes that travel is synonymous with life. She has lived in about 15 cities, and several of them, she writes about several of them in this book, specifically Delhi, New York, and Istanbul, but also Chennai, Mumbai, Banaras, Bangalore, and many more. And through her travels, she grapples with two questions. How do we lose what we lose? And why do we love whom we love? This book evokes memories of love and loss. It's extremely poignant. And I've told her this, that the prose is just exquisite. I was just lingering over some of those paras. Thank you, Ananya. So let's start with the book title itself. So it's called Place. But as I read the book, I realized that you don't mean place in just a geographical sense alone. Place for you is an emotional connotation as much as it has a physical one. Somewhere in the beginning, you write that there is a public street map and there's a private mood map, and that's how you navigate a place. Could you expand on this dichotomy that interests you, which is the interiority of a place as opposed to its geography?
Thank you so much, Radhika. Actually, the title of this book was suggested by my publisher and my editor, Ritu Menon. And she's the one who detected, in a sense, in many of my scattered writings written over a long period about different places, she felt very strongly that there was always a particular thread where I seemed to be connecting with a place in a very specific way. And so I was not just a traveler or a tourist or a kind of person coming from outside and experiencing a little bit and then going away, but that she felt that there was some sort of consistent set of relations that I was establishing with a place. And some of that was based on, encounters that I had with people. Some of it was because I was interested in ideas and texts and books that were connected with that place. Some of it from personal experience and emotional, turmoil of my own. So she felt that, there's a kind of continuous dialogue between the external landscape and some kind of an inner voice. And she proposed that we try and put together a set of these essays along those lines. So yes, there's definitely an external cartography, but there's a kind of map which only makes sense in the mind, in a sense, or in the heart. Yeah.
So you did mention that a lot of this is also personal experience, and that's something I said, that this is part memoir. But it's not, there is no linearity in the way it's structured, right? So we go between different time periods. So how did you choose to structure, I'm sure you and your publisher, of course, choose to structure the book in the way that it has, going back and forth between different cities and time periods?
See, it's not written as a memoir, in the sense that I didn't write it all together retrospectively. Many pieces were written when they were written and published when they were published, which could be any time in the last 20, 25 years. the, when we decided to do this, then we revisited a lot of my older writings. And I also volunteered to write afresh about many places, now that I have the benefit of hindsight and so on. And I had to go back to my notes and my photographs and my, memories, some of which I had sort of totally set aside in a sense. And so we realized that there was no particular reason to structure the table of contents in the order in which the pieces were published, right? From beginning to end or end to beginning or whatever. And that the logic had to be sort of internal to this kind of meditative, reflective prose. And we could meander in any order through the different cities. The only thing was that I did want to start. So one piece was set aside to be sort of a foreword to the book, almost. And that's the piece set in Dresden. Apart from that, I wanted to start in New York with 9/11. And I wanted to end in Banaras, with my mother's death. And the centerpiece of the book, I very much wanted to be Istanbul. And there's 2 essays about Delhi, so they are kind of distributed over the order of cities. And, the rest kind of fell into some sort of place because we are going in and out of India and we are going to different parts of the world. And we are also jumping back and forth in time. And sometimes an essay is located in one time, and sometimes, because I'm writing it later, I introduce, multiple kind of timelines. From later, from earlier, etc. So it's a little bit kind of meandering. Yeah.
Works very well for me. You did mention that you start the book with New York and that you have Istanbul in the middle. And then there are, of course, 2 essays in Delhi. And so I think your love for Delhi comes across very well. You live in Delhi right now. But these 3 cities especially mean a lot to you.
Yeah.
So could you talk about why these 3 cities are especially so special for you, given the number of places you've lived in?
Well, I, was born in Delhi, raised in Delhi, and I've come back to live there after all kinds of journeys to all kinds of places. So it does feel like home. It's also the city that bothers me the most. I mean, that I feel most sort of concerned about because of, its political environment, its physical environment, and the terrible state that it's in currently. So I can't not love it, but I can't leave it, even if I hate it. I keep coming back there. So that is the closest I have to a home. Actually, neither of my parents is from Delhi, so in a sense, I'm kind of, I just have sort of appeared there, but I could have been from other places, But now I made it my own. New York, I have spent a lot of time in as a student, as a young academic, as a aspiring writer, and it feels like a kind of second home to me. I haven't been there in the last few years. Now I feel that with the recent election of Zohran Mamdani, I might gather up the enthusiasm to go again. But I wanted to start with 9/11 because of the current context of the genocide in Gaza and the continuous sense of war and crisis in which we are sort of steeped at the moment. And I feel that many of those political processes which are tracked in this book, the kind of rightward trend of politics, the repeated wars, the crisis of American power, um, the rise of the Hindu right in India, a lot of it kind of goes back as a starting point to 9/11. You know, that explains a lot historically, and I'm a historian, so I also kind of try to look for larger patterns in what are otherwise just chance experiences of an individual, right? So that's why I want to start with New York. Um, and Istanbul is a place that I have come to genuinely love, and that feels to me like a second home. It was entirely accidental how I ended up there, and now I have a kind of recurrent and continuous connection with it. I have a lot of friends, I know it very well, and I could spend any amount of time there quite happily. But it's also interesting to me because it's so much between East and West. It's so reminiscent of India, but it's also so much looking out into the world. And because of what has happened to Turkish secularism and Turkish nationalism, it provides many interesting contrasts and counterpoints and comparisons to the Indian story. But it's just much easier to look at and analyze when it's not happening to your own society. You know, sometimes it's just. I mean, this is a terrible thing to say. It's almost kind of voyeuristic, but I think as a scholar or as an analyst, I feel better able to handle, you know, Turkey's story than I am India's story.
You're further away from
Yeah,
it.
but also it's such a beautiful city, and it's just so, there's something so extremely rich and complex and layered about it, in the mix of cultures, in the long historical record, in the very kind of you know mixed and beautiful architecture and so on. So I've not studied the language, but I have some comprehension now from going there for so many years. And yeah, so it's just one of those places for me that that really means much more than, you know, a holiday or a trip or yeah.
Um, you know, we had spoken about, you said earlier that the book meanders a little bit, right? And there's a lot of mediation here and there. There's a lot of philosophical mediation. And you do write extensively about, you know, interviews, or not interviews, just interactions with the various public intellectuals who inhabit these various cities. Um, so when you're talking of Delhi, you speak of Ashish Nandi, and then in New York, you wrote about how you were excited going to Columbia for the first time because Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak was there. And then there's this wonderful chapter, which I urge you all to read, about her father's interaction with Samuel Beckett. I really enjoyed that. And she writes about how she herself went in search of Giorgio Agamben, who was very difficult to find because he's chronically offline and not very contactable. And so there's a lot of these various conversations that you have about all kinds of questions, political identity, so on and so forth. For you, do these interactions with public intellectuals, whether it's through their reading or in person, do they really shape your memory of a city? And do they also, are their ideas really important in how you envision a city?
Yes, I think so, and I think Ritu was able to see that right away, you know, in a way that I wasn't. But very many places I've developed a long-term connection with is through writers, through public intellectuals, through painters, through artists. Um, you know, their work one can engage with wherever one is, but the person you can only meet when you're there. And I've sometimes, you know, through luck and chance, and sometimes through the kindness of friends, and sometimes because I've made such an effort, I have managed to meet a range of people who, I mean, the important common factor for me is that they themselves are deeply engaged with their own society and their own culture, knowledgeable about it. And they, you know, when Orhan Pamuk tells you something, or Ashish Nandi tells you something, or, you know, Jacques Rancière, who I met in Paris, but I hadn't written about it here in this book, or, Edward Said sitting in New York. I mean, I've seen him, but he died soon after, I first started going to New York. But what people like this, through their lifetime of learning, of creativity, of public engagement, what they can tell you about a place, what they can teach you, what they can point out, and you can then go and look for it and search it out. That's to me very valuable. Like, for example, the Indian painter, he's not in here, Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh. Somebody whose work I really, really follow very, consistently and continuously. I've spoken to him many times. And when I was going to Venice, actually, I was going to teach at the University of Venice for a semester. And he said to me, "Oh, you should go to this museum and look at this painting, and go to this archive and look at this, set of Renaissance painters, Italian painters." And I did that. And I went because he told me to go, And then when I came back and then looked at his work again, then a lot of things fell into place, So in a sense, I piggybacked on his journey, which he had made as a young man, going to all the museums in Italy or in Europe, and how that has shaped his work over a lifetime. Similarly, one time I was going to Cambridge on a fellowship, and Ashish Da, who I work with, said, "Oh, I've only ever been to Cambridge to look at the papers of Ramanujan, the mathematician," because he wrote an early essay about Ramanujan. And he said, "Oh, I remember, I used to go to this pub, and you go to Trinity College to the library, and they have the Ramanujan diaries there. And he met the Englishman who interviewed So, it opened a different Cambridge for me than like what my work there was about. It was 40, 50 years ago, and Ashish Da himself was a young scholar, and he was thinking about scientific genius, and that was a question which interested in him. And, he went into the life of this strange Indian genius mathematician who died young. So these kinds of, sometimes hints that a knowledgeable person will give you. With Pamuk's work, I mean, I know Istanbul more through his work than I know it, because I have sort of reverse engineered my knowledge of the city by walking everywhere that he writes about, by visiting every neighborhood that he lived in, and so on and so forth. So for me, people are the gateway, in a sense, right?
So you had spoken about starting the book with New York, and then you end with Banaras, where you take your mother's ashes. Death is a recurring theme in this book. So you speak of the death of relationships, the death of your parents. There is a chapter titled "The Death of Sanskrit." You had written about it for the Hindu as well. And then you speak of how death had undone so many in New York. Why was this a conscious choice, firstly, to mention it in so many chapters, or do you think it just stems from your own personal losses and so you weaved it in? Or is it also that we're all constantly losing parts of ourselves and gaining parts, and so there is, in that way, some part of ourselves are always dying?
All of that, I think. I've experienced loss and death myself, but everybody does, so I'm not unusual in that. But writing helps me to process that and also, in a sense, externalize it, and also to understand, the ubiquity of these experiences in the human condition, right? People are constantly suffering or grieving or losing what they care about. And traveling, in a sense, puts a very sharp accent on that, because you arrive and then you leave, and sometimes you never go back to that place, and you may never see those people again, right? Or if you return, the place has changed so unrecognizably that you know that you've lost what that place meant for you when you first visited it. Or it becomes associated with a part of your own youth or your own, I was a different person when I was somewhere or other than I am now. And I come back and it's all different because I've changed, right? So I think travel is a good metaphor for our journey through life. I mean, this sounds very cliche to say that, but it really is. And the fact that journeys begin and end just reminds you that so does life. And you walk along with people for a while and then you take different paths, or sometimes there's nobody who remembers something except the one person with whom you were there at that time. And if that person is gone, you don't know, you have no point of reference.
So
right?
this was a form of catharsis, writing.
It was a form of coping, of healing. Although I don't know if one ever really heals from anything. I mean, I think you just kind of learn to carry on with all the slings and arrows. But also, this is a theme which, my father's a poet and he writes about death a lot. A lot of his poetry is about death. I also think about it sort of systematically, philosophically. And again, it's exacerbated by the kind of politics we inhabit, which is, Achille Mbembe calls it necropolitics, because it's so much centered around death, through war and so on. I think I've learned to sort of, who is the third who always walks beside you, you just, once you become conscious of it, of death, you can't forget it, I think.
So we're being asked to wrap up soon.
Yeah.
So I have 2 more questions for you. Again, since we're talking about death, you speak about the death of Sanskrit. And I'm just going to quickly read out these 2 lines that you had written in an article earlier where you had said, "Nothing in my experience or education up to that time had prepared me for the sheer wall of prejudice that blocked the access of someone like me to the particular aspects of the history, ideology, and politics of Sanskrit that I was interested in. Here I was, female, a North Indian in South India, a student enrolled at a foreign university, a Hindi speaker, and only tenuously and dubiously of a caste that pundits considered acceptable." Do you think that prejudice and bigotry are some of the reasons for the decline in Sanskrit, and has any of that changed at all, since you're a Sanskrit scholar and you have a chapter on that in your book?
Well, actually, I'm writing a whole book, which is the main book I'm writing about the modern life of Sanskrit. And so much of that is shaped by my own, experiences in becoming a scholar of Sanskrit. I think, the question of another subject that I've been working on and off for now several years, more than a decade, closer to 2, is Ambedkar, a life of Ambedkar. And these 2 things
also features in the book.
And these 2 things go in parallel for me, because I think without an understanding of caste, without an understanding of, the social life of Sanskrit, um, uh, and without factoring in how gender affects that or impacts that or distorts one's access or makes it difficult. You don't have any realistic sense of what it is, right? I mean, you can read a text, but and you can engage with it as though it were removed from a social world, but it never is, right? Or from a historical moment. No text is ever outside of its historical moment. And so I have found and encountered certain difficulties. Of course, The Death of Sanskrit is a famous essay by my advisor, Sheldon Pollock, in which he recounts 4 moments in the longer history of Sanskrit where it ceases to be a language for intellectual and literary exchange as a dominant, discursive instrument. And he locates it in different parts of the country, different moments in the last, 1,000 years roughly. But what I'm trying to say is that Sanskrit is, in a sense, it's always dying, but it never quite dies, right? And it's not a living language, but it continues to be in our midst. And that is the conundrum, which is why I'm trying to write the book. Actually, my whole book is, in a sense, inspired by this problem of the life and the death of Sanskrit, which has some political and some social and some historical vectors. It's so alive when you're immersed in a text that you love. But it's so problematic in a framework where you're talking about democracy and equal rights, and you're trying to turn away from prejudice and exclusion of all kind, and resituate what is essentially a very erudite, closed, elitist, patriarchal, knowledge world. Right. You're trying to locate it in, everyday life with your commitments to equality and so on. Right. It's just, it's really a hard thing to do. Yeah.
So I'm just going to wrap up with a last question, although I have a few more for you, but we can take that off stage. When you write about so many cities and when you have lived in so many cities, what is your idea of home? And because you write of your love for 3 cities, can you say that a person can have multiple homes?
Yeah, home, I mean, in some sort of banal sense, I say, oh, Delhi is home. But I now literally inherited my parents' house, and I live in that house, which is a very odd experience because I lived in it as a child, and then I didn't live in it for most of my youth, and now I live in it again, but they're not there. So I still say it's my parents' house, but it's not really. It's my house now, right? And it's a kind of anchor in a world that is changed completely for me and in general. My father has a poem, actually. It's in Hindi. And the title of the poem is D203, which is the address of our house. And the poem is very short. It's like four or 5 lines. And it says something like, this is my address. We don't have a board outside which gives the street address. And we don't, actually. And we've never had the name, and we've never had the number. So people come and ring the bell, and they get lost and so on.
Nightmare for Swiggy boys.
Yeah. And my father says that it is my home, but who knows? In that poem he says, tomorrow 4 people will walk in and take me away, and I won't be able to come back. And it's a reference to a famous poem by Kabir. And actually, that's exactly what happened. You know, when my father died, we brought the body home from hospital, and then we, four people indeed, carried him on a bier, and we took him to the cremation ground. You know, but the fact that you are not safe in your home from death, right? I mean, those four people are always going to come for you, right? Wherever you are, you can't hide from that eventuality. I mean, that's the point of this very little poem. That, you know, is this my home? That's what he's trying to say. And that for me is a continuous problem and a continuous question. It allows me to enjoy many places because I recognize that all you have is that time that you have. But it also prevents me from feeling securely rooted in a way that I think, for example, my mother always was. Even though, you know, she began her life by being displaced on account of partition. So she worked really hard to then root herself in a home. And her roots are so strong that in a sense I'm still sort of living off of them, you know. It's her home, which she spent her whole life making. And I'm just sort of riding it out till it lasts, you know, because I have no idea how to be that rooted myself.
So I think we unfortunately have to wrap up. We have time for questions from the audience, maybe 2 questions.
I do want to read a little bit also.
Oh, yeah, so I'm so sorry.
I don't know which we should do
just
first.
1 minute. Yeah, please do. She just wants to read a portion of the book. It won't take long.
Yeah, we have time?
Can we?
Yeah. Okay, I'll just read for you from the last essay in the book, which is about Banaras. And it's called Kashi Karvat, which is in Hindi. I'll explain the word as I go along. I was in Banaras again. This time I had with me an urn with my mother's ashes and 2 cousins, both women, slightly younger than me. It was 2 days after my 46th birthday. We stayed in a small hotel, otherwise quite pleasant, except it had a direct view of the burning ghat, Manikarnika. We booked 2 rooms, but in the end we slept in one of them, leaving the urn by itself in the other. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, still somewhat cold in mid-February, we took a boat and went out on the Ganga. Take us towards Tulsi Ghat, I said to the boatman, but don't take us close to the bank. My father was a poet. My mother used to say to him, let's go and live in Banaras. You can write your poetry by the banks of the Ganga like Tulsidas. Your poems will be immortal. My father, though, regarded such proposals with deep skepticism. What will you do, he asked her. I will keep a cow, she said, and watch the river go by and listen to you recite your poems. And I'll put bananas in the courtyard of the Hanuman temple for the monkeys. We will grow old together and we'll die in Kashi and we'll attain moksha. My father was not enthusiastic. We can do that here, he said, at home. In the event, they did both die at home, scarcely 3 years apart. There wasn't a cow, but my mother had 2 dogs that she loved. And there were monkeys who came to raid her mango tree in the tiny garden in front of the house. I thought the least I could do for my mother was to scatter her ashes in the Ganga at Tulsi Ghat, where she had wanted to live in an idyll of poetry with her beloved, my father. Rose petals, small floating diyas, ashes, into the flowing waters they went. Years later, I decided that I would write a book about Tulsidas. This is my next book. The poet of the epic Ramcharitmanas, who lived in the late 16th and early 17th centuries and died in Banaras. Our first trip to Banaras was when I was a young teenager and my father was making a film for television about the newly announced Ganga Action Plan, inaugurated by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. The dirty river was to be cleaned up at long last with substantial funding from the central government. My father was going for a reconnaissance trip, but my mother wanted him to take us along to see the holy city. It turned into a family holiday. On this trip, I traveled with an urn. After letting go of my mother's mortal remains, I sat in the gently bobbing boat on the quiet, lightly mist-colored waters of early morning, my two cousins wrapped up in shawls, saying nothing. I recalled being on a boat with my parents and my father at some point tearing off his clothes and jumping into the river. He had grown up swimming in the Betwa, the river of Kannauj, his homeland. He swam with powerful strokes, and I watched transfixed. My mother, though, was impatient. She too stripped down and leapt in after him. "Take me with you," she shouted. "Don't leave me alone here." They were both in the river, which has a powerful current and is very deep and very dirty. I took a photograph, which I still have. She's holding on to his arm, her cheek pressed to his shoulder. They're both laughing and waving at me while trying to stay afloat. 30 years later, we took my father's ashes to Prayag in Allahabad. And again, my mother got out of the boat in the sandy flats of the Sangam and walked into the water. Her sari and her long hair streaming behind her, her whole body taut and twisted with anguish. She looked like a mermaid with seaweed hair. "Take me with you," she shouted. "Don't leave me alone here." Again, I watched from the boat, not afraid. I knew their love would hold them aloft, keep their heads above water, and carry them through to safety. This time, I did not take a photo. Into the same river they went, he first upstream, she later downstream, with me as their witness. I sat in the boat in a reverie, transported from present death to past life, reversing the arrow of time. In Banaras, the Ganga flows westward, as though trying to return to its distant source in the high Himalaya. Only later, past the city, does it resume its course east and south to the Bay of Bengal. This is called Kashi Karvat, the turning at Kashi. The turning over that happens when we are asleep and change sides without waking up for a brief time. When death comes, one turns from the future towards the past, like a sleeping person in the middle of the night, changing our perspective even though our eyes are closed. Perhaps we turn away from our nightmares and look to pleasant dreams, or perhaps we just need to rest. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yes, sir. You want to ask a question?
I just want to know about Mamdani's rise in New York. What is the urge of the New Yorkers to elect him as the mayor, considering the massive Jewish population there, which I think is second to Israel, and others are Greeks and Irish people. So what do you think was the urge of the New Yorkers to elect him?
Well, he ran an extraordinary campaign and he reached out to all, New York is like India in miniature. I mean, it's a collage of different communities, different religious groups, different identities. Everybody is a minority, right, in some sense. And he reached out to not just Jewish New Yorkers, who voted for him, by the way, in large numbers, but to Muslims, to Hispanics, to South Asians, to, you name it, to blacks. He reached out to every segment of the population. I don't know if you followed his campaign and his press, but he is multilingual. And you can hear him speaking in Arabic, in Urdu, in Bangla, in Spanish. Whoever he's speaking to, he starts speaking their language, at least for the purposes of the messaging for the campaign. But that really makes people feel like, he can represent us. He can understand our problems. He knows our city or our portion of the city or life for our community, for our class, for our income group, and so on. And I think he's done an amazing job in conveying how genuine he is about his politics. I mean, of course, many leaders start out offering that kind of hope. I mean, I lived in the States when Obama, had his two runs as president, and I can recall even now. I mean, it really was such a thrilling thing to see democracy in action. Um, and how things turn out later is a different matter. Um, but yeah, I feel like New York went through a very dark time, especially around COVID and with Jeffrey Epstein and all these things. Maybe it can come out of that tunnel through Zoran, God willing. Yeah.
Hello.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we are out of time. We have to end the session.
The last question?
There's one gentleman there.
So,
Please go on.
so
Oh, sorry. Where? Who? I thought you had raised your hand. Sorry. Yes.
you mentioned about how you
A
live
little
in
louder, please.
you mentioned how you live in your parents' home. Like, so do you feel like a stranger in your own home, kind of thing?
No, of course not. I don't feel like a stranger, but sometimes I feel like a child, or I feel like a caretaker of what is actually their legacy. Not quite fully able to express my own self in the midst of all their books and their things. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think we're eating into somebody else's
Yes,
time. But somebody ate into ours, so it's okay. Yeah.
Great passage. I really liked it. It was very beautiful. My question is, you speak about places and cities,
Yeah.
and how your experience of a city is very informed by people's recommendations on the experiences
Yeah,
of that city.
yeah.
I'm curious to know what your take is on, is there an objective, like part of it, which is an objective experience of a city
Yes.
and a subjective? Like for Kochi, for example, like the places stay as the places. Is there an objective experience to every city, or is it always a subjective between who you interact with and those recommendations you get from those? This kind of ties in with what you said about the language as well, with Zoran Mamdani being able to speak
Yeah,
to
yeah,
lots
yeah.
of people. So
Yeah.
knowing the language definitely plays a role.
Yeah, so let me tell you, actually language is a big issue for me, right? And I speak French, I speak Italian, and I speak obviously Hindi and English, and I understand Punjabi, and I understand Kannada, and so on and so forth. I understand Bengali. So studying Sanskrit is very useful. I even understand some Malayalam, and because it's highly Sanskritized in some registers. And now I understand quite a lot of Turkish because of going there so much, and because of borrowings from other languages into Turkish. And for me, if I'm not able to understand my linguistic environment, then I have a very hard time relating to a place, So many of the places I write about, I'm able to more fully engage because I have some linguistic aptitude or some access, to how it feels for a native, right? And where I don't have that at all, like, I don't know, I went to the Czech Republic, for example, or in I don't know, Thailand or something like that, right? Then it's a little harder for me to tell you objectively what I would like to tell you about this place, because I feel that I'm also at a remove from it. So language to me is a primary kind of sensory mode. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're really out of time, so
Thank
we
you
will
so
wrap
much.
up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this